On the 16th of August 2005, we were all in the church, and evening prayer had just begun. Since Brother Roger was presiding the prayer, he was right at the back, and we all had our backs turned to him. So none of the brothers saw the actual attack on him. We just heard some very shrill cries. When we turned around, it was already too late, even if Brother Roger was still sitting, and he was carried out of the church and lost consciousness and lived only for minutes. There was no great struggle to live. Life just went from him very swiftly.
I'd almost forgotten how long it takes to get to Taize. It really is in the middle of nowhere. And yet, every year, thousands of people from all over the world follow these winding roads in the heart of the French countryside to visit this unique ecumenical community. It's 14 years since I came here to interview its founder, Brother Roger Schutz, or Brother Roger as he was known, or Frère Roger in his native French. Now I'm travelling back to the community, and it's almost a year to the day since his brutal murder.
Tributes have been paid to the founder of the Taize religious community, Brother Roger, who was stabbed to death during a prayer service on Tuesday evening in France. Pope Benedict said he was shocked by what he called the terrifying murder of a man regarded as one of the 20th century's leading ecumenical figures. Jackie Rowland reports from Paris.
Brother Roger was taking part in a prayer service attended by about 2,500 young people at the time of the attack. Members of the congregation say a woman stood up during the service and stabbed Brother Roger in the throat.
I was devastated knowing that, this crime happened and that Père Roger was assassinated. I was devastated. I'm very sad. But at the same time, there's something about him giving himself to the world,
The French film star Juliette Binoche, who came to Taize as a teenager and has never forgotten Brother Roger or his vision.
I felt there was some kind of fire inside of this community. It was a sort of a little paradise.
The community now has more than 100 members, men from both Catholic and Protestant backgrounds. Brother Roger, a Swiss Calvinist pastor, was its prior for more than 60 years. He also became an international campaigner for peace, justice and reconciliation, meeting popes and world leaders. But his biggest single achievement was in bringing together Catholic, Protestant and Orthodox Christians as no spiritual leader had ever done, although his pioneering work was not without controversy.
He could say he was Catholic, staying a Protestant, and he was truly Protestant and fully Catholic. He was reconciling in himself the different traditions of the Church. Protestant would say, some Protestant would say, that's a treason.
Arnold de Clermont, president of the French Protestant Federation. As we'll discover in this programme, any spiritual leader who helps change the course of Christian history certainly provokes questions. There's a real sense of coming home as I walk up the hill here at Taize with backpacker pilgrims from all over the world. This brings back happy memories, the welcome area. And Brother James from Derby, as I recall.
Hi, Mike.
How are you
Good to
doing?
see you again. All right, yes.
Are you keeping well?
Yeah, not bad. Yeah.
And how many pilgrims are here this week?
Well, we've got maybe 4,000, I think, from all over. A lot of Italians, lots of Romanians. But, we're still waiting for a bus of Russians who's got stuck in Poland.
It's a lot of noise into the night then.
Yes.
Young people have always been drawn to this place, but these days you only have to be at Taize for an hour or so to realise that many of today's pilgrims are confident and sophisticated, with Bibles in one hand and fold-up mobile phones in the other. After a day of scripture study, worship and discussions, they're more than ready for a glass of the local Burgundy wine. But the community's beginnings were starker and much less convivial. Amid the violence and enmity of the Second World War, Brother Roger embarked on a journey into the unknown to form what would become the first religious community of its kind in the world.
Dans mon enfance, j'étais très surpris In my childhood, I was very surprised that believers, Christians, who all wanted the love of God in their life, remained separated and at times even opposed. It was a question for me, and I later tried to give an answer by saying, let's gather together a few young men, and throughout our life, day after day, we will try to live the answer of the gospel, reconciliation above all.
Brother Roger speaking to me back in 1992. Unusually for a Protestant, he'd had a keen interest in the monastic tradition since he was a child, and as a student in Lausanne, got together groups of friends to discuss questions of faith and take part in retreats. In August 1940, at the age of 25, he cycled from Switzerland to Burgundy, where his mother's family still lived. Here, close to the once famous Catholic Benedictine monastery of Cluny, and with the help of a loan, he bought an abandoned house in the remote hilltop village of Taize, with the idea of starting his own religious community. Alone at first, he helped starving refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. Brother Emile told me more.
We're standing just in front of the original house, which Brother Roger bought in 1940. The dividing line separating free and occupied France ran just a few kilometers from here, and so Jews trying to find refuge, going to Switzerland, could stop here for a few days and continue on their way. In 1942, Brother Roger had to leave. Someone told the police that he was hiding people, and fortunately he was away, because on the 11th of November 42, when the German army invaded the southern part of France, what was called up to then the Free Zone, the very first day they came to visit the house at Taize, they knew what was going on. If Brother Roger had been there, that would have been the end of Taize in 1942.
Back in Geneva, Brother Roger was joined in a flat by 3 other Protestant students, and together they embarked on a life of common work and prayer. Brother Daniel was one of them. He told me how, after the liberation of France, they were all able to move into the house at Taize. He said it was clear Brother Roger had a special mission to work for reconciliation among Christians and all people.
C'était absolument évident.
It was absolutely obvious. What he communicated to us could be summed up in one word: unity. There was the unity of believers and the unity of the human family. They naturally both go together. He had a strong sense that unity exists, that divisions have come at the level of institutions, but there's a unity of persons, of believers. There's a unity in the human family. And our community wants to anticipate this unity of the human family, to live it in anticipation, as if this division did not exist.
But in the early stages, it was a matter of taking small steps. The local Catholic Church had hardly been used for 150 years, so Brother Roger wondered about holding community prayer there 3 times a day. Despite some suspicions, he eventually received permission to use the 12th century Romanesque building. Brother Emile took me there.
Yeah, this is the village church in which the brothers prayed in for many years. They were authorized to use it, and they loved the sound of this church. The acoustics were absolutely wonderful for song, and it was actually very difficult to leave the church to go to the bigger church in the 60s, because the acoustics are really very special here.
In those days, of course, they were all Protestants.
In the early days, all the brothers were from the Protestant church, and so it was unusual for a church to be of the region to be used in this way, and authorization came from the local priest. Then some people questioned that decision, and the decision had to be made in Rome whether the brothers could use the church or not. And there was first of all a negative response, then the papal nuncio.
The brothers did eventually get permission from the Vatican to use the church, but the authorities initially banned local Catholics from attending the services. And Brother Roger and the community sensed their ecumenical venture would be paved with stumbling blocks. By 1949, the brothers numbered 7, so they decided to make their monastic commitments, vowing themselves to a life of celibacy, the sharing of goods, and the acceptance of the authority of the prior. Monasticism was still regarded with suspicion by many French and Swiss Protestants. In his private journal, Brother Roger reflected on the challenges he faced.
With all the prophecies of doom that we hear, it is important to remember that very often, in the most difficult periods of history, a small number of women and men throughout the world were able to turn the course of historical developments because they hoped against all hope. Through the momentous events of this century, we are offered a way of emerging from the process of regression, which for several centuries has been affecting Christians so deeply.
I think his achievements have to be seen against the last World War, a broken Europe, a desperate need for reconciliation, and therefore what he was trying to do was to make what he regarded then as a very small contribution to healing.
The former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey.
I think it's only now, 50 or 60 years later, we look back and see how radical that message was at the time. He had a quiet revolution going. It was a reformation of major significance. He was actually saying to Catholic and Protestant and everybody, you belong together, God accepts you as you are, and I want to create a community where that it becomes possible.
He took Christ's words very seriously. When you present your gift to the altar and you remember your brother has something against you, go first, be reconciled. For him, reconciliation could not be postponed, could not be put off until later. And so naturally that's not always understood. Well, for some people reconciliation is one item among many others, and we'll come to it later. But for Brother Roger it had to be put into practice immediately, and it was connected to credibility.
Brother Emile. As the community began to grow, the brothers hoped that ecumenical contact with the churches would become easier. But when they went to Rome to meet Pope Pius XII and other church officials, they reportedly encountered only stubborn resistance. Today, Christians of all denominations pray together at Taize. Back in the 1950s, this was controversial. For centuries, Protestants and Catholics had become entrenched and refused to compromise. With Catholics still saying the Mass in Latin, they didn't even worship in the same language. And they disagreed on issues such as the nature of the Eucharist, the veneration of the saints, the place of Mary, and the authority of the Pope. But Brother Roger didn't think reconciliation should be delayed because of theological differences. His successor, Brother Alois, a Catholic from Germany, explained that from early childhood, Brother Roger had learned to look beyond denominational boundaries.
Yes, his grandmother, who during the First World War went to a Catholic church. She, who came from a Protestant family, she went to Catholic churches to pray there. And she said, but if we Christians don't start with reconciliation, where will it start? And we will not be credible anymore. And Brother Roger followed her example during the Second World War.
Brother Roger's maternal grandmother was one of two major influences on his life. The other was Pope John XXIII. When I met Brother Roger, he explained why.
He had this certainty, the certainty that the most essential thing is reconciliation. You could say that he wanted to make reconciliation among Christians something concrete. He used to say, let us be reconciled. We don't have to search who was right or who was wrong. Coming from someone like John XXIII, who was a pope, and one of Christ's poor, that was something very powerful, and has remained something powerful. And his words are so gospel-like that we want to continue to follow the way he opened.
Frère Roger, I think, moved more and more in the direction of the Roman Catholic Church.
Lukas Fischer is a former professor of ecumenical theology and a former director of the World Council of Churches Faith and Order Commission. He worked alongside Brother Roger as one of the Protestant observers at the Second Vatican Council, which met in Rome between 1962 and 1965, and opened the windows of the Roman Catholic Church to the climate of the modern world.
I remember a conversation I had with him in the late 50s when he told me now that the vocation of the Reformed Church is to contribute to the renewal of Catholicism. And I responded to him by saying, shouldn't you rather say making a contribution together with the Catholics to a new form of Catholicity of the Church? You see, the word Catholicism refers to the Roman Catholic Church with its hierarchy, with its authority, with its structures. Catholicity is a larger reality, new realization of the communion in Jesus Christ. And I think the ecumenical movement is an attempt to realize a Catholicity which is greater than Catholicism. But Frère Roger, he was of the opinion that the ecumenical movement could only reach its goal through the renewal of the Roman Catholic Church.
And in France, where Catholics and Protestants had fought a long and bloody war, there was even greater concern that Taize was growing too close to Rome. Arnold de Clermont first went to Taize as a 20-year-old theology student.
I've been there in the Council of French Protestant Federation when Taize said, we don't want to be any more a member of the French Protestant Federation, and we were ashamed of that. It was like a piece of the Protestant life was cut out and difficult to understand. And it took me, like for the others, quite a lot of years to understand.
In 1960, talks were held at Taize between Roman Catholic bishops and pastors from different Protestant denominations, the first high-powered ecumenical gathering of its kind since the Reformation. The number of visitors started to increase, so the brothers had to build a new church. The publicity thrust the obscure religious community onto the international stage, and young people started coming in droves, as they still do today. It's 7 o'clock in the morning here at Taize, and the site here is peppered with tents which look like giant molehills. There's not much sign of movement, and indeed the whole feel of this area with the khaki and blue tents is one of military presence. I think members of the military would have been up by now. Let's see if anyone's awake in this tent over here.
Hallo Miriam, ist Zeit zum Aufstehen. Weißt du, dass schon bald das Morgengebet anfängt?
Good morning. Is that an early morning wake-up call?
Ja, das ist.
Did you sleep well?
Ja, wir haben gut geschlafen. Merci. It was good. Weather, it wasn't raining, so everything's dry. It was good.
What is it that attracts you to Taize?
Well, it's my first time to Taize, and I like the songs and the silence.
My name is Matthias, I'm 22, I'm from Berlin in Germany, and I've come to Taize because I like the atmosphere, I like the prayers, the songs, yeah.
But you missed morning prayer this morning?
Yeah, I missed morning prayer, I overslept a little bit.
It's a place where you can put your luggage on your sides and share.
International screen actress Juliette Binoche recalling her teenage experience of Taize.
You can be who you are, no matter, where you come from. I felt like I was accepted as I was. If I was good or bad, or having faith or not having faith, there was something about allowing myself to be who I was, not knowing who I was exactly. So that was the treasure of this place.
Now, as the water cannons are hosing down onto these students, the police are replying with tear gas grenades, and my God, they smell vile. Here come the rocks, here come the pieces of paving stone that are being hurled through the air. Oh, a man's just been carried past me, streaming with blood, wounded in the head by one of these paving stones.
the Paris riots of May 1968. They began as a series of student strikes in high schools and universities, at a time when free thinking and free love were a natural expression of modern youth culture. Secular existential thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre were being held as the new icons of European youth. But others were searching for spiritual answers to the meaning of life, and thousands of these headed for Taize that summer. Brother Alois, who was 14 at the time of the riots, turned up at the community a few years later.
I felt something is changing. I felt that there is a kind of fear between the generation, yes? That the adults start to fear the young people, to be afraid of the young people. And when I came here to Taize, I didn't see that being afraid of the young people, but welcoming them. Always when young people meet, there is a lot of joy and there is an atmosphere that young people create. But Brother Roger felt very clearly that all these young people also come with their sufferings, broken relationships, not knowing how to build up a future now. What will be my professional career? Who am I? All these questions create doubts. We cannot only find political and economical solutions. We also have to find spiritual solutions to our modern questions. I think Brother Roger felt that it's very urgent, a very urgent historical moment. He felt very early the necessity to open up to the young people. Brother Roger dared, and we see today how necessary this was.
First of all, I don't understand why there is terrorism. I think it's so difficult to react spiritually on that because it's...
Global concerns may have changed over the years, but young people visiting Taize today welcome the opportunity to discuss contemporary issues in a cross-cultural context.
So maybe our responsibility is to show that there's another way with faith and with God.
Just talking to people, like we're doing now, we're talking to each other.
Yeah.
And you always went away from Taize, not thinking you've been on a retreat, but you've been fighting a battle. You know, there's a sense in which you're very much in touch with the world at Taize.
Lord Carey, who led a pilgrimage to Taize with 1,000 young Anglicans. As well as the weekly meetings of prayer and reflection on the French hillside, there are annual gatherings in various European capitals. The brothers also make visits to Africa, North and South America, and Asia, where they live among the poor. Brother Roger undertook many of these journeys himself.
Justice, I remember being with him in Central America, and he spoke about justice and sharing, and how could Christians be surprised if some people were trying to impose that? So if we are not able to go in that direction as Christians, then we shouldn't be surprised that maybe some people are trying to impose that on society. And so he was very aware, I think, of the responsibility of Christians. And perhaps it was not always understood.
Brother Emile. And at a time of ecclesiastical and political tensions, Brother Roger also visited the Soviet Union. And when the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church told him they could print only 5,000 Bibles for the whole of Russia, Brother Roger organised for 1 million copies of the New Testament to be shipped over. He also took part in secret trips to support oppressed Christians in other parts of Eastern Europe, as Brother Alois recalls.
People asked in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, if Brother Roger could come. And the cardinal asked the government, but the government said no. So the cardinal said, but come just like this. And Brother Roger went just for a weekend to pray in the churches. And it was a silent visit. And one man who was an important man in this Charta 77 in Czechoslovakia, that was a protest movement, he said Brother Roger shared with us the silence. And it was a very strong visit, even if there was no word.
There was always the danger that such work, especially among the poor and oppressed, would lay itself open to accusations of political involvement. And there were sometimes suggestions that Brother Roger was leaning too far to the left. Lord Carey.
There's some people who've said that, but I think the times warranted that, really. When you think of the terrible situation in Eastern Europe, and he had a particular love for Eastern Europe, he really wanted to reach out there. He saw, to some degree, the attractions of communism, if lived out in terms of equality and so on, but he saw the dangers of totalitarianism and all that. But he wasn't a politician, and he didn't have a political message as such. It was a spiritual message in which reconciliation was the heart of it.
I'm now inside the Onion Dome Church of the Reconciliation, in front of a display of 8 orange sails which resemble tongues of fire. For Christians here, a colourful symbol of the Holy Spirit. There are also chimney blocks containing glowing candles, which the brothers tell me represent the living stones of the church. Worship 3 times a day follows a simple pattern: chants, a psalm, a Bible passage, silence and intercessions. And the unique feature of Taize is that you hear readings and sing songs in different languages. So here the liturgy enables people of all denominations to pray together.
Notre frère aimait beaucoup la musique.
He loved music. He used to listen to a lot of music, especially Baroque, Bach, the hymns of the Reformed tradition of Luther and the Huguenots. We sang those hymns a lot in the community.
Brother Daniel.
Et puis un jour, le frère Roger a fait un voyage.
One day he travelled with Brother Robert, who was responsible for the music. They stopped in Catalonia at the Abbey of Montserrat. And he heard some repetitive chant, and he had the intuition that this repetitive chant could be a way of helping people to pray today. A few words from the Gospels or Psalms, repeated again and again, that carry the essence of the message of Christ. That was the beginning of the search for music that continues today.
Et ça a été à l'origine de toute une recherche.
We liked very much the melodic character of the songs. So something like, bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. I think there is that kind of arching quality to it, which is characteristic, I suppose, of quite a lot of music in general. I think is often like that. It's architectural.
I still remember, just to tell you how deep it was, I still remember one song, and more than the words, the melody, and because there was, it's probably like a mantra, it's healing. It's ti-da-da-da-da-dum, dum, 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 ti-dum, dum, 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 dum. It's a chant that you repeat, and it's something about the melody and the rhythm that is healing in the body and soul, to put them back together. And I remember the softness, to be inhabited by the chant inside you. And it's true, it brings peace and less judgment on the others and on yourself.
Juliette Binoche. The meditative chants are composed of a simple phrase repeated many times. The brothers say they express an essential reality which can be quickly grasped by the intelligence and then interiorized. The director of music is Brother Jean-Marie.
It's So there you have a movement already from la, an octave, as we said, right? So there's a certain kind of a height to music. It also reaches down. Bless the Lord, my soul. It's this one was done by Jacques Berthier. I don't think it's a coincidence that my soul is lower. Of course, if you were just to repeat these songs, to repeat them over mechanically, I think we'd be the first ones to want to get out of the church if you heard it that way. There's a certain spirit to it, and there's a kind of an interiority to the prayer, a meditative quality, which I guess we feel very strongly about. But it's certainly not the only way of praying. And it takes time. I think in a world where there's a lot of noise and also a lot of work with our heads, I think it takes time sometimes. And we see in the course of a week that the prayer is something that grows on people.
And Brother Daniel says some of the best songs were composed by Brother Alois, who became the new prior.
Je me rappelle de l'arrivée du frère Alois.
When he arrived, he had long hair and was playing guitar. One of my first images of him, he's playing in the church 30 years ago. He's a very gifted musician. He will follow Brother Roger's musical intuitions.
Oh, I like the classical music, but I like very much the Beatles also, yes, and it struck me so much, this freshness of singing in the 60s. Yeah? In the church, this has not always been like this. The singing in the church was sometimes much more tired, yes, and so I was very happy to find here also a freshness in the singing.
Sharing simple meals is a fundamental means of uniting young people from different religious backgrounds and cultures. The way pilgrims share the Eucharist, the representation of the Last Supper, has proved more controversial. The brothers are anxious not to offend the institutional churches, and notices at the entrance to the church state that pilgrims can receive Holy Communion in their own tradition. But in practice, this isn't necessarily what happens. You said you were an Anglican?
Yeah.
What do you make of the arrangements for the reception of Holy Communion here?
I think it's great that there's blessed bread, so you can take that every morning, and there's communion as well, and because it's ecumenical you can take it if you like, and it doesn't matter, we're all just Christians in the end.
So people in your Anglican party wouldn't think twice about receiving at a Catholic Eucharist?
No, not at all.
And the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, admits that when he was at Taize, the denominational boundaries certainly weren't policed.
They were very blurred, and they were blurred because of the spirituality of this man and the brothers who worked so closely with him. So I think, although he respected the laws of the different denominations, I think it was terribly important for some churches, like the Orthodox Communion, nevertheless, he was encouraging that kind of reciprocity, that kind of understanding, and helping us all. Brother Roger was always pushing boundaries. I mean, that was the nature of the man.
Christians are still divided on their understanding of celebrations of the Last Supper. In general terms, Orthodox Christians, Roman Catholics and some Anglicans believe that Christ is really present in the sacrament of Holy Communion, whereas other Protestants have more symbolic interpretations. For this reason, the Catholic Eucharist isn't normally available to non-Catholics. So many were surprised to see television pictures of Brother Roger receiving the Catholic sacrament at the funeral of Pope John Paul II last year, from the hands of Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict XVI. But Brother Emile revealed to me that Brother Roger had in fact been receiving the Catholic Eucharist for some 40 years, with the knowledge of Rome.
He received the Catholic Eucharist since the late 60s, even when he visited Pope John Paul II in Poland. The future Pope gave him the Eucharist many times, and in Rome. And of course, he lived reconciled, so there was no reason to be. But it was a very original path.
There was speculation before and after his death that Brother Roger had secretly converted to Roman Catholicism. The Taize community vehemently deny this and say such suggestions defame his memory. Brother Emile.
It's not something that resembles what we call conversions, or that it was a very original, something new in the church, I think, to be able to reconcile within oneself both traditions. And maybe Brother Roger was not just an exception. Maybe his life also indicated a way forward, because what he was attentive to is to never humiliate anyone. He used to say this. Sometimes he had to defend this also, that reconciliation cannot involve the humiliation of one church. So it's not a question of one church being absorbed by another, but it's a question of going towards the fullness of faith together. For the church to be itself, it needs all the gifts that are in all the Christian denominations.
Roger was not capable of deceit. And the idea that for all those years he was a crypto-Catholic doesn't go with his character. I could not see Roger conniving in deceit. But I could see Roger accepting the generosity of another church, and because he's the kind of radical person who will push on the doors, and if the door half open, he would go through it. If he did accept in some way that he was now a Catholic, it would not be in denial of his Protestantism.
Lord Carey. But Lucas Vischer thinks Brother Roger did move too close to Rome.
He did perhaps not sufficiently appreciate what he had inherited in the Reformed Church, namely a great gift of freedom. He could never have achieved within the Catholic Church what he has achieved as a Reformed Christian, because the attempts of the Taize community would have met immediately with the limits imposed by the Roman Catholic authorities.
With a thunderstorm raging overhead, thousands are quietly gathering here for Brother Roger's memorial service. The church is in semi-darkness, with candles flickering around its many icons. I actually find the silence quite disconcerting, really, as though many around me are still struggling to comprehend why one of the world's great peacemakers was killed so violently. It still raises so many deep questions, even for the brothers themselves. Brother Roger died at the hands of a Romanian pilgrim, and there are other Romanians here tonight.
I was last year here when everything happened. It was awful. Everybody was screaming, everybody was crying. There were a lot of ambulances, a lot of people were fainting. I don't know, it was a shockful night. Everywhere you look, Brother Rogers is here. He's not dead. He lives through us and through our faith and through everybody that comes here again and again every year. He was a very special man, and I still love him. I can't believe he's dead, because he was so peaceful, so full of peace, so full of good. He only did good on this earth, and look what happened to him. I think he's in a better place now, where only good is around him.
Even at the funeral, there were some raised eyebrows that Brother Roger had already requested a Catholic Requiem Mass. while many inevitably wondered whether the community's vision could continue without such a figurehead. The ecumenical movement failed to take the course that Brother Roger had anticipated, and his life was often marked by struggle and frustration. For him, communion always had to be a lived reality, and as a result of his leadership, the common life of the brothers at Taize allowed the undivided church to become visible once more. But is it really possible for such a unique community to survive without its founder?
When organizations start by one charismatic individual, as in the case of Roger, you fear for the future. Will this thing last when the founder has passed away? And this is going to last and last and last, because it's a community based upon the most important principle and theology of all, that is reconciliation. And so I'm praying for that community, for the new leader. I have absolute confidence that they will go from strength to strength, and that Brother Roger in the communion of saints will be among the first praying for them.
Lord Carey. The community must now work out how best to move forward, but it has few guidelines. Brother Alois, the Catholic appointed by Brother Roger to take over as prior, says that, as a Christian of Protestant origin, Brother Roger accomplished something that was without precedent since the Reformation, even though he played it all down.
He had the impression that he didn't accomplish a lot. That's difficult to say because it's impossible to understand. We told him no, but we tried to tell him that he made possible our common life, all this welcome for the young people, but he didn't see it.
What do you feel his legacy is?
It's to trust in God, who loves everybody without any condition. And I would say this is all. The rest we have to invent. He never told us what we should do after him.
Et au début de Taize, il y a 52 ans, quand j'étais la seule, je disais...
At Taize's beginning, when I was alone, I used to say, it's important to take risks, to risk your life, perhaps. There is this wonderful gospel reality that Christ takes upon himself in his heart of hearts what weighs us down, what is a trial and a cause of suffering for us. God has already prepared what we shall become.
Dieu déjà a préparé notre devenir.